Hello students, let us continue the class on healthcare associated infections or nosocomial infections. Recollecting back the definition, infections acquired by a patient in a healthcare facility after 48 hours of admission, which was not present or incubating at the time of admission, and which also includes occupational infections among healthcare workers, is healthcare associated infection or nosocomial infection. What are the major types of healthcare associated infections? They are device associated infections and surgical site infections. In last class, we have learnt about COTI, that is catheter associated urinary tract infection, and VAP, that is ventilator associated pneumonia. Today, let us learn about central line associated bloodstream infections and surgical site infections. Bloodstream infections carry high case fatality. There are two types, primary and secondary bloodstream infections. Primary bloodstream infections, here the infection is starting within the blood itself. There is no other source of infection. Whereas in secondary bloodstream infection, the bloodstream infection is secondary to other site of infection. That is, there might be a infection in bone and joint infection from where the pathogen has seeded into blood, or a urinary tract infection from where the pathogen has seeded into the blood. Looking to the risk factors include the age, extremes of age, that is either very young age group or more than 60 years old, immunocompromised states or comorbidities like diabetes, parenteral nutrition, loss of skin integrity like burns, and use of intravascular catheters is the cause for device associated bloodstream infections. Looking into these intravascular catheter types, they can be peripheral vascular catheters, which can be arterial or venous, and central venous catheters. Peripheral venous catheters, the first picture above, they are inserted on the dorsum of the hand, into the veins on the dorsum of the hand, or into those who near the antecubital fossa, to administer IV fluids and medications, and to administer blood and blood products, and to draw the blood. But they are only for use, they can be used only for short term, that is couple of days. Looking into peripheral arterial catheters, the picture below, here it's inserted through the radial artery. This is used to monitor the hemodynamically unstable patients, to monitor the variations in their blood pressure. Looking into central venous catheters, these are introduced through the veins like subclavian vein, internal jugular vein, or femoral vein, the central lines, so that they can reach into the greater vessels closer to the heart. Okay, and today let us concentrate on central venous catheters uh, and learn about central venous catheter associated bloodstream infections. Looking into the risk factors, they are duration of catheterization. Longer the duration of catheterization, more is the risk of infection. The type of catheter used. These catheters, central venous catheters, can have multiple lumens. So more the number of lumens, more is the risk of infection. The type of catheter. Usually the catheters made of polyvinyl chloride carry more risk of infection than those made with Teflon or polyurethane. The catheter site chosen. So we have already learned that the central venous catheters can be inserted either through subclavian vein, internal jugular vein, or femoral vein. So when you insert through femoral vein, there is increased risk of infection because of the close proximity to the genitalia. So central venous catheters are used in critically ill patients who require longer term administration of IV fluids, medications, or continuous central venous pressure monitoring, oxygen saturation monitoring, and it's also required for patients on hemodialysis or to administer chemotherapy in cancer patients. Looking into the types of central lines, they include peripherally inserted central catheter, which is inserted via the veins in the antecubital fossa, like cephalic veins and basilic veins, and then we have a subclavian line wherein it is inserted through the subclavian vein, internal jugular line inserted through internal jugular vein, and femoral line inserted through the femoral vein in the leg. Here you can see the picture of the central venous catheter. The cream portion is the catheter, flexible catheter, which is inserted, say, via the subclavian vein to reach the greater vessels like superior vena cava, which is in close proximity to the heart. And the blue portions are the lumens. This is multi-lumen catheter. It's having 3 lumens uh, through which we can administer by attaching the administration sets, we can administer IV fluids, medications, and blood products. Here you can have a closer look. The blue portion which we have seen previously lies externally. Only the cream portion is the one which is inserted through the central vein to reach the greater vessels close to the heart. So you can see the external portion which has 3 lumens which have clamps so that the lumen can be closed whenever not needed. And there is a hub, that is a needle-less connector hub, which can be attached to the administration sets. That is, we want to administer IV fluids or medications, and then which can be closed with a cap when not in need. The next picture beside, please notice the catheter hub because it is one of the main sources of infection. So central venous catheter associated bloodstream infections, there are 2 terminologies which are not interchangeable. One is catheter related bloodstream infection, and other is central line associated bloodstream infection. Looking into catheter related bloodstream infection, it is mainly used for clinical diagnosis and treatment. Here the clinical criteria must be present, that is signs of erythema, induration, swelling at the site or tenderness at the site. And looking into the catheter criteria, the catheter criteria is that yes, this CVC must be in place. And looking to the culture criteria, it is more complex. It even requires removal of the catheter to culture the catheter tip semi-quantitatively, or you can use blood cultures which should show differential time to positivity between central line drawn blood and peripheral line drawn blood. The central line drawn blood should flag positive at least 2 hours earlier than that drawn from the peripheral line. So it's more complex and expensive process. Looking into central line associated bloodstream infection, it is used for surveillance of these healthcare associated events, and clinical criteria need not be present always. And the catheter criteria here is that the central venous catheter must be in place for more than 48 hours, and simple qualitative blood culture is sufficient. So let us proceed learning about central line associated bloodstream infections used for surveillance purpose. Looking at the definition of CLABSI, it's a laboratory confirmed bloodstream infection not related to infection at any other site in the body and which develops within 48 hours of central line placement. Central line is the CVC. Now, what is this laboratory confirmed bloodstream infection? It's a primary bloodstream infection which is confirmed by a positive blood culture, and the pathogen isolated in this blood culture is not associated with any other site of infection. And one more thing you have to know here is, if the blood culture isolates a pathogen, then single blood culture is sufficient. But in case if we are isolating any commensal or flora which is normally present on the skin, then we have to repeat the blood culture. So it requires 2 or more blood cultures for commensals commonly present on the skin. Looking into the pathogens, they're usually the bacteria and the yeast. They include Staphylococcus aureus, coagulase negative staphylococci like Staphylococcus epidermidis, Pseudomonas, Klebsiella, Enterobacter, Citrobacter, then Enterococcus, Corynebacterium species, particularly in immunocompromised like Corynebacterium jejcium, yeast like Candida, and Malassezia furfur. Looking into the pathogenesis of CLABSI, how does the infection enter? One is the extraluminal route, wherein the flora present on the skin of the patient or on the hands of the healthcare workers, they colonize the catheter tip and they enter in, when the catheter is inserted, they enter into the bloodstream. Then how is it that they are colonizing the catheter tip? When proper aseptic precautions are not followed or appropriate skin preparation is not done before introducing the catheter tip, then uh, these flora can enter the bloodstream causing the infection. Next is the intraluminal cause of infections are contaminated catheter hub. Once you have inserted the catheter, the healthcare personnel will be handling the catheter hub for administration of fluids and all to attach the IV administration sets. If proper aseptic precautions are not followed during this time and the catheter hub is not properly disinfected, then the pathogens enter intraluminally into the bloodstream. Next is a contaminated infusates like fluids and medications when they're contaminated, like mainly lipid infusions when you're giving, it's contaminated with Malassezia furfur and they enter the bloodstream. Looking to the diagnosis of CLABSI, uh, in the definition we have seen there's something called as laboratory confirmed bloodstream infection. It's of three types: 1, type 1, 2 and 3. So looking into LCBI 1, it includes isolation of pathogen in a single blood culture and does not require any clinical criteria, and this is in any age group patients. Whereas the type 2 is isolation of commensals at least in 2 blood cultures with associated clinical criteria, be it fever, chills or hypotension in any age group patients. Type 3 includes isolation of commensals in 2 cultures with associated clinical criteria which are usually seen in less than 1 year old, which can be hypothermia, temperature less than 36 degrees, bradycardia or apnea. So this LCBI, be it any type, along with the catheter criteria, that is presence of catheter for more than 2 calendar days or more than 48 hours, is considered as CLABSI. If there is laboratory confirmed bloodstream infection without catheter criteria, then it is not CLABSI. Look into preventive measures. One is preventive measures taken during insertion of the catheter, and other set is the preventive measures taken during maintenance of the catheter. So let us look into the line insertion preventive measures. Follow appropriate hand hygiene. The central line insertions can't be done anywhere on the ward side. They require appropriate environment and maximum sterile barrier precautions. Choose appropriate site of insertion. Usually subclavian vein is preferred, not the femoral vein which is in close proximity with the genitalia, which increases the risk of infection. Appropriate skin preparation, use of chlorhexidine, 2% chlorhexidine with alcohol, 70% alcohol is a preferred antiseptic to clean the area before the catheter site is infected. And how you clean is by applying appropriate friction in circular motion from center to periphery, and allow this antiseptic to dry before the catheter is inserted. But in children less than 2 months, they're allergic to chlorhexidine, so povidone iodine is a preferred antiseptic. Then once you insert the catheter, it should be properly secured to site, and a semi-permeable dressing is more preferred. Looking into line maintenance after the catheter is inserted, what are the preventive measures you have to take? Following appropriate hand hygiene, wearing personal protective equipment while handling the catheter, appropriate alcoholic hub decontamination. That is, whenever you're handling the hub, it should be decontaminated with alcohol wipes. Catheter side dressing, you have to daily notice is it soiled or damp, and whenever it is soiled or damp, it has to be changed. Change of administration sets, say the IV fluid lines or should be changed every 4 or 7 days, and if you've given a blood transfusion, it's better to change within 24 hours. And daily we have to assess for the readiness of removal of central line. If we see any redness, swelling or tenderness, it's a time to remove the central line. So these are the pictures showing how the CLABSI can be prevented. Appropriate hand hygiene, maximum barrier precautions, skin preparation, full body drape. Entire body should be draped, only exposing the site where you have to introduce the catheter. Appropriate scrub of the hub, appropriate site to be selected, and then daily review of line necessity. So this was about central line associated bloodstream infections. Now let us move on to surgical site infections. Looking into the definition, they are infections that occur within 30 days after operations, any operation. But when it's cardiac surgery, joint surgeries involving implants or breast surgeries, you can go up to 90 days. That is, infections occurring up to 90 days after these surgeries are considered as surgical site infections. Looking to the type of surgical site infections, they can be superficial incisional surgical site infections, which involve skin and subcutaneous tissue, deep, which involve muscle and fascia, and organ or space surgical site infections, which include the organs. What are the risk factors? They are triad of risk factors: host factors, microbial factors, and surgical or environmental factors. Looking to the host factors, we've already discussed the age of the patient, the malnourishment, comorbidities, immunocompromised state are the host factors. Microbial factors are any skin or nasal carriage of pathogens like Staphylococcus aureus, okay, or the virulence of the pathogens. Staphylococcus aureus, Streptococcus pyogenes are more virulent than pathogens like bacteroids. Then inoculum size. What is the inoculum size of the site where you're operating? If it's a colonic surgery, the inoculum size of the flora present there is very high. So it carries more risk of infection than when compared to surgeries at other site. Looking into environmental and surgical factors, what is the type of wound created? Is it a clean wound or a contaminated and dirty wound? Yes, contaminated wounds and dirty wounds carry more risk of infection. Then, are the appropriate aseptic precautions followed or not? Improper preparation of the site of the surgery can carry a risk, or use of drains can carry more risk of infection. If proper oxygen saturation or temperature has not been maintained, there might be increased risk of infection. If there is hypothermia, there are increased chances that wound might not heal properly, and there might even be cardiac events. Similarly, if proper oxygenation is not maintained, there might be impaired perfusion at the site of surgery. Even the prophylactic antibiotics, inappropriate antibiotics, giving inappropriate antibiotics or broad spectrum antibiotics wherever not needed will increase the risk of infection because it leads to emergence of resistant pathogens. Looking into the source and the pathogens, they can be endogenous source of infection or exogenous source of infection. By now you know endogenous source is the patient's own flora, which is skin and the mucous membrane, or it can be the seeding from a distant source of infection. And the pathogens are Staphylococcus aureus, coagulase negative staphylococci, E. coli, Klebsiella, Enterococcus, anaerobes like Peptostreptococcus and Prevotella. Looking into the exogenous source, it is from the operation room itself, or the people present in the operation room, the healthcare workers, the instruments. And what are the pathogens? There's Staphylococcus aureus, Pseudomonas, Acinetobacter, etc. Coming to the diagnosis, it's based on the clinical criteria and microbiological criteria. Clinical criteria includes the purulent discharge from the operated site, erythema, swelling and tenderness at that site, or abscess at that site, or wound dehiscence. Then, looking into microbiological criteria, you have to collect this sample aseptically. So that usually the preferred is the tissue sample, or it can be a fluid, that is a pus. And sample collection is very important in microbiology because we want to isolate the pathogen but not any contaminant. And this pus or the tissue sample should be subjected to culture to isolate the pathogen. Looking into the preventive measures, they can be preoperative, intraoperative, or postoperative preventive measures. It's a combination of them. Preoperative preventive measures include uh, identifying the what are the comorbidities and treating them, like if he is diabetic, controlling the glucose levels. We have to identify and treat the remote infections. Then preoperative bathing with soap and water, antimicrobial prophylaxis, that is starting antibiotics like cefazolin or cefuroxime depending on the surgery type, which should be given at least 60 to 120 minutes before the surgery so that appropriate tissue concentration of antibiotic is present and the risk of infection is reduced. And we can even plan for redosing. Usually single dose of this antibiotic is sufficient, but if the surgery there is longer duration of surgery, like surgeries like joint surgeries or cardiac surgeries, they take longer duration. So the prophylaxis can be continued up to 24 to 48 hours depending on the surgery. Otherwise, single dose will be sufficient. And if there's huge blood loss also, we have to plan for the redosing of antibiotic based on the half-life of the antibiotic. Then appropriate hair removal, actually not needed, but when you're operating and there is hair at that side, it has to be clipped away but not shaved because shaving causes micro abrasions in the skin and might be a source of or carries the risk of infection. Looking into intraoperative preventive measures, proper surgical skin preparation. We have seen we have to prepare the skin, do antisepsis with chlorhexidine alcohol combination or povidone iodine, proper surgical attire, appropriate surgical scrub for 2 to 4 minutes. We have to limit the traffic in the operation room. Should not be too many people in the room, and the doors of the operation room should not be opened frequently. There should be appropriate ventilation, appropriate laminar airflow system unidirectional, and appropriate air exchanges should happen in the operating room. Looking into post-operative measures, they include appropriate surgical dressing. Okay, and dressing should be changed whenever it's damp or soiled, the drain care and its removal whenever indicated, and appropriate OT disinfection at the end of the surgery. So OT disinfection is very, very important. So the same thing taken from a journal. Additional things you can see here is appropriate temperature maintenance is very important, and oxygen saturation should be more than 95%. Even the blood glucose level should be monitored. This is the picture showing that proper scrub, proper surgical attire, proper skin preparation should be done. Okay, so that was about surgical site infections. Lastly, let us look into Clostridium difficile colitis or a pseudomembrane colitis, which is caused by use of certain antibiotics like clindamycin, amoxiclav, and cephalosporins. What they do is when you use them inappropriately, they cause loss of normal gut flora. When the gut flora is lost, what happens? It allows the pathogens overgrow. So here there's overgrowth of Clostridium difficile, which elaborates necrotizing toxins and damages the colon. So you can see the picture below, which is showing pseudomembrane formation known as pseudomembrane colitis. So how can it be prevented? By minimizing the use of these antibiotics and appropriate hand hygiene and environmental disinfection. So thank you.